Okay, so the next disease state is complicated rhabdomyolysis. So I mentioned that everybody's muscles break down to some degree and they have the raised muscle enzyme that we can easily measure. But most of the time they get away with that. Occasionally you don't. The breakdown products of muscle get into your kidneys and clog your kidneys up to an extent that they don't work. So that the urine output can diminish, weight goes up, you feel rotten, and if you do further blood tests on these people, then you can demonstrate an accumulation of things that the kidneys ordinarily eliminate. Now, we've had 2 of those in the West Highland Way race in my time, one in 2005, the other in 2007, and they don't normally come to light until some hours after the race, when people become aware they don't feel very well, maybe being sick, aren't passing urine, and if a day has gone by, then the weight will be increased. And the problem is, a day after the race, you may not be in the company of people who know anything about these conditions. And I don't think it's an insult to my profession to say if you trot along on a Monday morning and see your GP, it may not be the first thing you think of. So if you notice that your urine's down, or your volume is down, or it's this chocolate colour from the breakdown products of the muscles, you're feeling generally rotten. It may be up to you to persuade whoever's looking after you to do whatever blood tests are needed, and they're very simple, to check that your kidneys are working fine. So it doesn't come to light quite as quickly as the low sodium, which can declare itself during the race or very shortly afterwards. But in 2005, the 2 folk who fitted as a result of low sodium, one was just after withdrawal from the race towards the end, but not at the very end, and one was just after finishing. And that's usual. Okay, this low sodiums present relatively early with regard to the race, and the kidney injury from rhabdomyolysis presents a bit later. So you may be out of my hands by then. Oh, I didn't mention an important thing, but this is less preventable than the low sodium. But there is no doubt there is an association between the consumption of anti-inflammatory painkillers and the development of kidney injury with rhabdomyolysis. So for that reason, whatever your aches and pains, it would be inconsistent for me to give you an anti-inflammatory, and therefore they're nowhere to be seen, certainly from my perspective, during the course of the race. So if you've got any aches and pains, I'm afraid you just have to endure them or take some paracetamol. But you won't get ibuprofen or diclofenac or naproxen or Ponstant from me. And I plead with you not to take them yourselves either. If you look at all the cases of acute kidney injury with rhabdomyolysis in our own 2 cases and other people's, the incidence of concomitant taking of anti-inflammatory medications is high, and it's undoubtedly a risk factor. Heat stroke. So I mentioned that your temperature can rise, and if that's not associated with any other symptoms, that's normal rise in temperature. But if your temperature rises and you are unwell, then that raises the question of heat stroke, of which I've no great experience and I've never seen, and I hope I never do. I did in my hospital days do some time and anaesthetics, where a very similar condition can arise following exposure to certain drugs. And although I used to rehearse how I would deal with that, I was lucky enough not to see it then either. So I've no great experience of heat stroke. And all I can tell you is that if you're unlucky, it can happen. If you're hot and you're knocked off up top, then you're in for some cooling. As you can see on this last statement here, you need a high suspicion and you need to get in there early and implement cooling early. The problem is if you do that aggressively and the individual then becomes well, you can't know whether that person was heading for heat stroke or not. But I'd rather remain ignorant as to what they were heading for than watch them cook and then find that things are too late to turn them around. So I and my ilk generally be aggressive with cooling if we think it's needed, accepting that we probably do cool more people than we needed to. So that's the end of what I have to say about the generalized disorders: sudden cardiac death, extreme variance of normal, and disease states. I'm just going to mention a couple of localized conditions, of which this one is probably the biggest worry. But occasionally, if you've used a muscle group excessively, the muscle will swell and the muscle is contained within a sinew or fascia, and therefore you develop pressure on the nerve and artery, which is also within that sinew, and the muscles themselves can become damaged in a way that's irreversible. So the cardinal symptom of this is pain greater than can be explained by any other reason, and it doesn't go away, and you have to suspect early and cut the sinew surgically. I wouldn't do that, but I'd find someone who would, and release the problem and try and prevent substantial degrees of muscle damage and compression on the nerve and artery. So if you develop a pain in a muscle, within a muscle, which is greater than you can explain from your endeavours, then it may be this. I've never seen a case of this from the race. I've heard of a case from another race, and I've seen a case of it from a non-running, one case ever from a non-running course. First thing to do if you suspect it is to remove any circumferential bandage or dressing, and that can help a few. And if that doesn't work, then it's a surgical decompression that's needed on an emergency basis. You may know more about these than me, that prolonged exertion can be associated with bone stress, and that bone stress can culminate in fracture. And with runners, the two commonest sites are the shin bone and one of the bones of the foot, the metatarsal. Can you see those? They're by far and away the two commonest sites of stress fracture. I see a lot of those, and I've seen two of these. It's kind of spreading redness in the shin, and I can't explain why that happens. Two of them ended up in hospital with the hospital diagnosis of cellulitis, which is infection or inflammation of the cells, soft tissue infection, if you like. It's hard to say exactly what that phenomenon is, but it's clear for those who get it, the two that I've encountered who've had it, is quite debilitating, such that they've ended up in hospital and they've settled down on painkillers and antibiotics. But I can't explain why that happens. Unfortunately, it's not terribly common. So, I'll wind up here. These are my conclusions. Read the guidelines, and that's for the runners and the crew. Drink by thirst rather than any schedule. Avoid the anti-inflammatories. Monitor your weight. I'm not overly fussed about weight as long as you are well. But if you are unwell, then I'll take what's happened to your weight into consideration, and that might guide me in what I think and do. There are folk who get a bit worried that if they've gained weight, given that the rules say that I need to know if you've gained weight, then I might pull you out. But if you've gained weight and you are well, then that is of no consequence. If you've gained weight and you are unwell, it points to me as to why you might be unwell. So weight gain alone will not result in you being pulled out of the race. And again, if you lose weight more than 4% and are well, neither will that result in you being pulled out of the race. They're just pointers to help me interpret other things. You hear this condition bandied about. I don't know what it is. You get hot, for the reasons I've explained, and you get tired because you've run a long way. How that culminates in a condition called heat exhaustion, I'm not sure. So I don't know what that is, but you see the term. Banned in my language. People who don't deal with these events very often presume that everybody who's unwell is dehydrated and hope you've seen enough to know that that's not the case. That's a slightly dangerous assumption, is usually wrong, because from that they then proceed to tell you to drink copiously, and that can exacerbate other things. So if you're going to diagnose dehydration, mean it and know why you're diagnosing it. If you have to go and see somebody after the event because you're not well, take a copy of the guidelines and a pee sample and try and steer whoever's looking after you in a direction of doing the things that are on those guidelines. Jump up and down and get some blood tests, or get your backup member to do it. And I certainly wouldn't be pouring fluids intravenously into anybody until I know what the electrolytes, particularly the sodium, are doing. So that's me. I hope you haven't been bombarded with long words that you don't understand, and I'll take any questions. Yes? Sorry, can you speak up? Yeah. Okay. If you followed the reasoning, then the reason why sodium drops is not because you're deficient in sodium, either a deficiency that might arise either from dietary source or sweat loss. The reason why the sodium falls is because you've diluted it with excessive water. So if you follow that logic and you accept it, and that's obviously up to you, it's an invitation for me to do so, but I can't compel you to, then sodium supplementation isn't required, and it's not just me who says that. Yeah. If you venture the other side of the Atlantic, that's probably the only place in the world where the role of sweat sodium loss is thought to be significant. And from that, they extrapolate that you should take sodium supplementation. And I hope a demonstration of the sodium levels of the finishers of the Western States endurance run show the consequences of their strategy. I can't badmouth American colleagues, but I can show you American sodiums. I hope that's persuasive. So in answer to your question, sodium supplementation for the West Highland Way race, not required. If you were to take things on and do something completely ridiculous that went on for weeks, I might have to revise that statement. But for 35 hours, you're good with your current sodium stores. Yep.
Are there any dangerous levels of weight loss?
If you're well, you're well. As you saw from the South African Ironman figures, there's someone there who lost 12% from the starting weight. So it seems to be not overly dangerous, but I'm not advocating that. All I can say is that losing 4% is safe. Beyond that, it may not be, but the odds are still in your favour. Are you a weight loser when you run? Supporter. I don't think I've seen more than 6 or 7% loss in a finisher, and it followed the trend of what I showed you. That was, I think it was a German guy who either won or did very well, and he lost 6 or 7% and was right at the forefront of the field. So you see the pattern that the folk who lose a lot of weight tend to be the hairs out in the front, and that tends to be what you see. And by virtue of the fact they're running as they are, I'm relatively reassured that they're quite well. I mean, I'll take each case on its merits, but I haven't had to deal with someone who's lost 10% of their starting weight. So I hesitate to say there is no harmful degree of weight loss, but I haven't seen it so far. Yep. Kidney injury, yeah.
Is that as a consequence of the race, or is that something that an individual has been predisposed to because of their particular genetic makeup?
Okay. I think it's an exertional thing, and it goes in there with the muscle breakdown. The problem is, as I've demonstrated, that everyone gets a degree of muscle breakdown, and from that large number of people with muscle breakdown, a small number of acute kidney injuries develop. And I could give you some, but I won't, give you some explanations as to why I think that happens. But as far as I'm aware, it's not genetic. I've told you the single biggest risk factor is the consumption of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. I don't know of any genetic disposition. Okay, and if you weren't running the race and you took your ibuprofen recommended dose for a short period of time, you would not get a kidney injury. I know as a GP that we try not to have people on anti-inflammatories, anybody on long-term anti-inflammatories, and the potential for them to be toxic to the kidneys, even at prescribed dose, is there, and that's one of the reasons why we try not to have people on them long-term. So non-steroidals can be damaging to the kidneys, even at prescribed and recommended dose, in people who don't run. But the combination of a hard run with the rhabdomyolysis that goes with it, and even a small number of non-steroidals over the duration of the race can promote acute kidney injury, but I don't think it's genetic. Good.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Go on. Say aloud.
Yeah. Those is quick.
If you experience some swelling in your fingers,
Yeah.
can you tell me what that suggests?
Okay. I think that's pretty universal, and I don't regard it as a disease or pathological state unless it's part of swelling generally, weight gain, a bit knocked offness, which is heading down the hyponatremia route. But if your only symptom is swelling of your fingers and you're well and your weight is between that 2 and 4% weight loss, and I think that's an innocent consequence of just gravity with the fluid making its way down into your extremities and the thrusting down of your arm, which kind of forces fluid into your fingers. And I suspect many people who've done prolonged exertion will recognise that symptom, which appears kind of confined to the fingertips. Well, you're more runners than me. Is that people identify with that swelling feeling in fingers? Yeah. I think that's normal, and I haven't got any strategies to stop it happening. If you're swelling generally, that's not abnormal BC.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Chris again, not just for tonight, but obviously for his involvement in the race, and it makes a massive difference to us. So, round of applause. Thank you very much, Chris. We're just going to have a short break now, and there's tea and coffee, and there's some fruit teas there, and green tea as well. Probably the easiest thing to do is to get your cup first, put your coffee or your tea bag in. Katrina's at the hatch, she'll give you some hot water. And then there's some biscuits and sugar and milk on that table there. There is a little basket if you want to give something for the refreshments, then that will help. And we'll come back together in about 15 minutes. Okay? Thank you.